Welcome. This is July the 10th, 2022. I'm with Ajahn Punnadhammo. He's a senior monk with 30 years seniority in Northern Ontario. And Pannobhasa is a former senior monk with 30 years seniority, now a layman in South Carolina. And Ajahn's the author of this book, The Buddhist Cosmos. Highly recommended. I've read it on Buddhist cosmology, a very rare book of its kind. And Pannobhasa's got about 3 books. This is one of them, Buddhist Ethics, Buddhist Practice. And just this week, I've actually signed a contract. My publishers in India have written Freeing the Buddha. I first published this in 1999, and I changed the chapter, made some changes, so that's going to be reissued. So we're going to talk about, in this talk now, about Buddhism and Christianity. I thought of this topic because I think of them as quite different. That Buddhism and Christianity are quite different. So I'll start off by saying, I think one of the significant differences is Buddhism has an eightfold path with right view, with karma and rebirth, many techniques for working with the mind, purifying the mind. It's a long path over many, many lifetimes. In the Buddha, we have about 6,000 pages of his teachings in the Pali Suttas, whereas all of the teachings of Jesus you could write on a napkin. We got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I feel Jesus didn't really say that much new, like, love and love thy neighbor and things like that. But they don't really have within Christianity, I think, the psychological techniques. So there is a lot of wisdom in the Bible, Proverbs. Like back in 1988, I was a Christian for 1 year, and my pastor said, start off with Proverbs. And I thought, well, there's some really good advice there in the Bible. But I think the whole psychological teachings and the depth of Buddhism with the jhanas and meditation absorption state goes much further than Christianity. My own view is that studying the history, I actually feel that Jesus never existed. I think the historical evidence is just not there, because in that area around Galilee during that time, it was one of the most literate parts of the world. And yet there's really no contemporary record of him actually existing. I'm taking this from some sources, and I met people who were former Christians who spent thousands upon thousands of hours studying it, and they're convinced he doesn't exist. So that's my opening remarks on Buddhism, Christianity. So we can turn over to Ajahn Punnadhammo next.
Yeah.
Ajahn.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Well, there's a lot to say about this topic. It's a huge topic. As far as Jesus existing or not, I'm kind of agnostic on that question. I'm not convinced either that he did or didn't exist, but I also think it's kind of a secondary question, because whether he was an actual flesh and blood person living in the 1st century or whether he's a mythical figure, the religion established around him is something that's had obviously a massive impact on world history. It's something very important. One of the problems, I think, talking about Buddhism and Christianity is what Buddhism and what Christianity. And Buddhism, we have many different branches and sects. We're all of us here, I think, Theravada Buddhists. So that's where our perspective will be coming from. But Christianity also has many different branches, and they're quite different from each other. A Greek Orthodox would have almost nothing in common with a Southern Baptist evangelical. It's like quite different approaches and understandings. When thinking about Buddhism and other religions in general, there is the imagery of the metaphor of the elephant's footprint, which I've seen applied in this way, that it's like a Venn diagram. You see the Buddhist Dhamma is like a elephant's footprint, and all the other teachings in the world are footprints of smaller animals, and some of them will be entirely enclosed within the elephant's footprint, meaning that they're true but incomplete. Some of them will be outside the elephant's footprint, meaning they're entirely false, and some will overlap, and they're partly in accord with the Buddha Dhamma and partly not. And I see Christianity in that way, from the point of view of metaphysics. We would as Buddhists, we would see Christianity as essentially Michididi. It would be covered by one of the wrong views in the Digha Nikaya's Brahmajala Sutta. It's the eternalist view that there's a creator God, which violates the principle of dependent origination. If there's a arbitrary will of a creator, then not everything arises according to causes and conditions. So it's ultimately wrong view. But it is a valuable teaching in the sense that it does have some fairly or quite sound ethical principles, and there is the teaching that there are results of good and evil deeds. So it does keep people, if they follow that religion, it keeps people being, their ethics are quite similar to Buddhism. There's obviously some differences, but it does keep them on an ethical path. Well, there's more I could say, but maybe I'll turn it over to Pannobhasa and get his initial thoughts as well.
Yes.
All right. Well, for starters, I would say that assuming that anybody exists, I think Jesus probably did exist. Partly because, there are testimonies of other people in the Bible claiming, like James was considered to be Jesus's brother. Also, like Paul, he's claiming to have met some of the personal disciples of Jesus and so forth. And also, for what it's worth, they may have actually found Jesus's bones in an ossuary or little crypt in Jerusalem towards the end of the 20th century. It's controversial, but there was a family crypt with all these ossuaries, including Jesus and Joseph and Judah or Jude and so forth, and Mary. All the names of his family, which are very common. So statistically, it's not really necessary that it was his family, because they were all very common names, except for Joseph, one of his brothers. So, I mean, there is that, but getting to Christianity itself, yeah, I'd say that there are some really radical differences, also some similarities, but some of the radical differences are like the Ajahn already pointed out. Christianity believes in a creator God, whereas Buddhism says that the creator is essentially ignorance or delusion of this universe. Also, of course, Buddhism says that there is no self, whereas Christianity teaches you have an immortal soul. Buddhism teaches rebirth, whereas Christianity has, it seems kind of strange, really, if you think about it, that you're going to go to heaven or hell forever and ever after this life, in all probability, depending on what school of Christianity you belong to. And so that the virtues or the vices of a few decades are going to result in an eternity of rewards or punishments, which doesn't seem entirely equitable to me. The thing is that as Christianity started off relatively primitive, there doesn't seem to have been a lot of rules and regulations and so forth, or with regard to systematic practice even. It was fairly simple. Just renounce the world and just essentially it was just a faith oriented, you believe fervently enough that somehow you're able to heal the sick and cast out demons and so forth. I guess just a certain virtue of renunciation would be involved in that. But so gradually, I mean, I've talked about this before, but gradually, like some of the contemplative monastic sects of Christianity came very close to Buddhism with regard to their practice, even though the theory remained very different. But still, they had the equivalents of jhana. They had mindfulness. St. John of the Cross even had like 3 stages of development. You had the ordinary person, or the beginner, which would be equivalent to like the Putujana in Buddhism. Then you had the adept at contemplation, which would roughly correspond with the Seika in Buddhism. And then you had the perfected, which surprised me even when I was reading St. John of the Cross. He's talking about how you can reach the stage of perfection in which you've completely mortified your self-will. You no longer are motivated by your own will, but by the will of God or divine will. You just become like this empty divine puppet kind of thing, which, I mean, there is a lot of overlap with the theory of, you know, what an arhat would be like. So I think over the centuries, just partly because of Western philosophy, I think that the theology of Christianity became more and more sophisticated until it has become very close to something like Vedanta, or in some respects even Buddhism. Although, I mean, they do have handicaps. You know, it's like in Christianity, you don't really merge with the highest truth. That the closest you can come is the beatific vision, where you get to be close to God. You get to be in God's presence, but there's always this separateness. There's always this individual soul that is separate from God, which I think that's somewhat of a handicap. Some of the teachings of Christianity they're sort of like almost like a ball and chain with regard to what you can accomplish with it. But that's just my take, I suppose. So I'll just anything you want to add is it's up for grabs. I relinquish the baton.
One little piece of trivia that I can't resist throwing in here. You're talking about the bones from that ossuary that were found towards the end of the 20th century. Did you know that they were sent to Thunder Bay to the there's a archaeogenetics laboratory here, and that those bones were sent here for examination and study.
Really? Is that the James ossuary, or is that Jesus himself?
James, well, the one that was they I remember them saying at the time it might have been Jesus' brother, James.
Yeah.
And they interviewed one of the scientists at that lab, and he said, well, there's no way we can verify if it's Jesus' brother or not. We need to have a sample of verified DNA from Jesus to do that.
Yeah.
All we can do is we can determine the dating of it, and we can perhaps establish some characteristics of the person, like his ethnicity and his state of health and so on.
So how old are the bones then? Are they 2,000 years old?
They were the right age.
I remember that. I think it was on the ossuary. It said James, brother of Jesus. I think it was James, and I think they cracked it when they took it off the plane. They cracked it when they delivered it. But I think it said James, brother of Jesus. That was around 1986. I remember that was in Time magazine at the time. It was big news.
Yeah. Well, they found an entire family crypt, and at least one of the ossuaries had been stolen, and that apparently was the James one that wound up, some guy who was selling, antique, archaeological stuff. But then there was also some construction workers working in Jerusalem broke into this crypt accidentally, and there were like, I can't remember how many, it was several of these ossuaries, and apparently one had already been stolen by the time the archaeologists got there.
Okay, well, I guess I'll comment on what you both said. First with Ajahn, that now whether Jesus exists or not, there's a lot of good ethics in the Bible. I would agree with that. Also, I like the idea of there is results of your deeds. Like if you're a good person, you can go to heaven. If you're a bad person, there's consequences of that. So they have the idea of karma and consequences after death. And I've always had a sense of trust with Christians. And I often joke that I owe my life to the Catholic Church because I'm the last of 5 kids in 6 years. So my parents had me because they were Catholic. So it's a okay religion, but I think whether or not Jesus existed, it's a big deal to the Christians, more so than in Buddhism, like with the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The Dharma still works, even if the Buddha didn't exist. But I think there's plenty of historical evidence the Buddha did exist. But if the crucifixion of Jesus atones for your sins and all who believe in it, and you'll go to heaven because of his crucifixion and the atonement, if he didn't exist, then that's a big problem. Then it doesn't work. That's part of their religion. Whereas in Buddhism, we don't have the same idea. And we're commenting what pannobhasa said. I think most of the evidence for Jesus is in the Bible itself. Like if you write a really good novel, in part 2 of the novel, you have the fulfillment of the Messiah from part 1. Like say Jesus's brother and these other characters, then Paul comes a generation later. If you write a really good novel, so one theory is that Nero, he died around 69 AD, and the following Emperor Flavius, he wanted to put down a Jewish messianic movement. So there might have been a motive to invent this character of Jesus, backdate him to about 30, 33, to split the Jewish messianic movement. So they say, give unto Caesar's what is Caesar, and turn the other cheek, to sort of divide them. So there might have been a political motive. But since then, I guess I feel the religion has been one of, not one of liberation. Like I think the Theravada Buddhist path of the Pali Sutras is the path of liberation. You're trying to help the individual get liberated. The Buddha said, no, in the end, you have to decide for yourself what you feel is true and practice it and follow it. You have to decide what's not true and abandon it. Whereas in Christianity, I feel it's more about control. You have to believe. It's a sin to doubt. And the only way you're going to get to heaven, Jesus says, only through me can you get to the Father. It's been a lot of history of control and violence. And for Europeans, it's a Middle Eastern religion which took over the European soul, the European psyche, which Europeans might have done better. And so that's part of my criticism of it, and that it is it's very different. But yeah, like pannobhasa was saying, if you just believe, I guess that's the idea. We go to heaven. It's kind of like with Santa Claus. You better not shout, you better not cry, you better not pout. I'm telling you why Santa Claus is coming to town. So if the idea of just believing, it's not enough. So I think it thwarts people from the efforts necessary, like on the Eightfold Path, right? After there's a lot of effort that is needed to work on your mind, and that's undercut if someone's told you you're fine, just believe, you're taken care of, just show up on Sunday, you'll be fine. So I guess that's my critique from a Buddhist view.
I would somewhat qualify one thing you said, with not disagreeing with it so much as just as modifying it. You saw Christianity as a Middle Eastern thought form that colonized Europe, and there's some truth to that, but it after the 2nd or 3rd century, it was so heavily influenced by Greek thinking that it became a kind of amalgam. And there's been, in Christian history, there's been an oscillation back and forth between the Semitic roots from the Middle East and the Hellenic roots from Greece. And at different times in different schools, one or the other has been predominant. You see this in Russian history with the rise of the old believers who were accused by the Central Church of Russia as being Judaizers because they were emphasizing the Old Testament so much. At other times, you get very sophisticated, which you see in like the early church fathers, often the kind of very sophisticated theology that really comes more out of Greek philosophy than from anything else.
Yeah, I like the Greek ideas. And I guess it's Roman ideas. Can you give an example of the Greek ideas that are part of Christianity as we know it today?
Well,
like the cosmology, like the gods? Pannobhasa can answer that.
Well, I mean, the very beginning of John is in the beginning, there was the Logos. And the Logos is a Greek philosophical idea. And they've turned Jesus into like the creative force that the Greek philosophers were, the Logos means word, but the Greeks believed that the name of a thing kind of was part of its reality. It kind of lent reality to the thing. And so John especially seems to have been very much influenced by Greek philosophy, even though he was apparently a Jew.
Oh.
Jewish Christian.
Probably a very
that Jesus was the Messiah.
Probably a very Hellenized Jew, like in the Eastern Roman Empire, Greek, anything east of Italy was so heavily influenced by Greek culture that
there was a lot of Jews, like some of the Apocrypha of the Old Testament was composed in Alexandria, where there was a lot of Jewish philosophers kind of collected together into some kind of school there. So it started even before Christianity came along, the Hellenization of like biblical or Jewish ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I mean, the main thing with Christianity, that one of the main reasons why I just couldn't be a Christian is this: it relies so much on belief in this story that you can't possibly prove is true.
Mm.
And it's just, to me, it's just a gamble. You're gambling your life, possibly your afterlife, on this story that you can't really prove is true. And some parts of the story, like if you literally interpret, what the Bible says, like some sects of Christianity do, then Jesus is saving us from original sin, which was caused by a man made from soil and a woman made from a bone being tricked by a snake into eating a certain kind of fruit.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, just the story part, like in Buddhism, like it's already been said, is it doesn't even really matter if the Buddha really existed or not, because Dhamma still works. It's still true, and you can verify a lot of it just from your own experience.
Yes.
Or like the Four Noble Truths, it's like the first noble truth is relatively self-evident. Second noble truth is self-evident if you do some introspection. The third noble truth is just a logical consequence of the second noble truth. If all suffering is caused by craving, then if you got no craving, you're going to have no suffering. And so really it's just the fourth noble truth. You have to have some faith in that, in order to practice it. And then maybe if you're very, you practice very, very rightly, then you can see that it really does lead to liberation. But at least most of it is self-evident. Whereas in Christianity, like I say, you just have to believe. And it's like in order for it to work, you pretty much have to be just almost fanatical, is you have to have absolute faith. You can't have any doubts whatsoever. And I think that may have resulted in Christianity in ancient times and even medieval times being somewhat like so-called progressivism is now, where there's like this hysterical intolerance of anyone who disagrees with them.
Yes.
And that's one reason why all the other Western religions were wiped out and Christianity became pretty much of a monoculture in the West, is they just would not tolerate anyone who disagreed with them.
I think that's a flaw of all kind of monotheistic religions, that intolerance, because if you, it sort of makes logical sense. If you believe that your teachings come from the Almighty Creator God, then they can't possibly be wrong. And anyone who disagrees with them is disagreeing with God. So he's obviously a very bad person and has to be put down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just Buddhist ethics. I mean, it's like Christian ethics are just decrees of God. If God says, don't eat meat on Friday, then it's a sin to eat meat on Friday when it's not a sin on Thursday. But with Buddhism, it's based on human psychology and what could be called natural law.
It's also the precepts are not commandments. The phrasing in Pali is sakadagami samadhyami. I will endeavor to train myself. I will endeavor to practice this way of training.
Yeah. So there's really no real concept of sin either, other than just akusala kama.
Right. I really like that. I often make this point if I give a talk on ethics, that the Buddhism rarely talks about good and evil. It talks about kusala and akusala, skillful and unskillful.
Yeah.
There isn't that heavy judgmental aspect to it.
Yeah. Plus the Buddha still encouraged like converts to Buddhism to still have respect for their former teachers and so forth.
Yes.
It wasn't really exclusive to the point of just intolerance.
Right.
Although he did have some words to say like about the Ajivakas who were on the road to hell, but still.
I'd like to maybe circle back to something you brought up before about the close affinity between the monastic practices in Buddhism and Christianity. I have had opportunity twice to attend conferences with in interfaith conferences with Buddhist and Christian monks, and they were very interesting experiences, because the the language used and the kind of metaphysical understandings are totally different. But when you get talking to the Christian monks one-on-one, their experience of life and their inner spiritual life is very close to that of the Buddhists, and we feel immediately a brotherhood with each other. We're very similar in a lot of ways, even though
Yeah.
our intellectual framework is quite different.
Yeah,
That
although
gives-
I do think that like Christian theology, like Catholic theology, it has gradually evolved into something that really isn't so different from Eastern philosophy. Like I had a Catholic priest tell me once that there is more or less of an idea of the two truths. You know, you've got ultimate truth and conventional truth.
Hmm.
And according to Catholic theology, according to this Catholic priest, you know, according to them, only God is ultimately real. And then this world and us in it are all just relatively or conditionally real because they're all dependent upon God
Yeah.
for their existence.
And in the Orthodox Christianity, they have the idea of the apophatic nature of God, which means that is completely beyond our understanding or expression.
Yeah.
So and they approach, and their approach to God begins, I don't think it goes the whole way, but it begins to approach the idea of an impersonal principle rather than an entity, a person. I visited a Russian Orthodox church, and the walls all around were covered in paintings. Like every square inch, there was, paintings of Jesus or the disciples or stories from the Old Testament, except the cupola, the dome over the altar, was left blank. And they told me that that's because God cannot be represented. It can't be held or understood by the human mind. So they just leave it blank.
Yeah, I think Buddhism originally began as very apophatic, where you're not trying to explain reality. You're not trying to say what reality is really like. You're just saying how to get there and experience it for yourself. Like the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata is just, the monk has no perception. He's got no belief, no view. And I really do think that in very early Buddhism, Diti really did just mean view. A monk wasn't supposed to have view. And then later on, it just came to be conflated with wrong view.
Yeah.
So when it says he has no view, the commentary says, well, he has no wrong view. It doesn't have any of the 62 wrong views or whatever.
Yeah. The commentaries, very often when I've looked at the commentaries, they often go against the plain meaning of the sutta. They try to explain things in a way that actually goes opposite to what the sutta is saying.
Yeah, that's one reason why a lot of Burmese monks they wouldn't admit to it, but they value the commentaries more than they value the suttas themselves. Because if in the sutta, the Buddha says blue, but the commentary says when he said blue, he really meant red. If you didn't have the commentary, you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Like when the Buddha says, Buddhism will last only 500 years because of ordination of bhikkhunis or whatever. And the commentary says, well, when he said 500, he meant 5,000.
Yeah.
And I don't know how Ananda would have understood that without the commentary handy yet, but there's a lot of that in the commentary.
You do realize when he said cheesemakers, he means everyone in the dairy industry.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes to my mind is the 5th century AD, the Catholic Church began the Catholic monasticism. I think it was Saint Benedict, and he said he got the rules for the Catholic monks from the master. And one theory is he may have just taken it from the Vinaya, from the Buddhist Vinaya, because that could have been known, like Buddhism made it, in like the 1st century BC, was in that area of the Middle East. So they may have borrowed this from Buddhism.
Possibly. Ashoka sent missionaries to Alexandria. That was on the list of places he sent missionaries to.
Yeah. So it's a similarity in the lifestyle, the inner thoughts or world of a Catholic monk to a Buddhist monk. And I suppose they have the time for contemplative life. If they're living a contemplative like St. John of the Cross, they could even have jhana and experiences like that.
There's also a historical detail that the earliest Christian monks that were like the Therapeutae, the anchorites in Egypt and the Middle East, and there were Therapeutae before Christianity. There was people practicing those ascetic practices in that area, and we don't know what their intellectual framework was, what their metaphysics was, but they might have very well been either Buddhist or at least influenced by Buddhism. And
Wow.
then when Christianity came in, they just sort of, they kept their same lifestyle, they just switched their ideology.
Wow. Yes, there might have been a blending there.
Mm.
Like what you said too about the net of views discourses, the 62 wrong views, how you could put Christianity just in one of those 62 wrong views
Mm.
from a Buddhist view.
Yeah, with regard to God and the soul and so forth, definitely.
Yeah. There's also another thing I'd like to bring up is that over the years I've seen different books or talks on Buddhism and Christianity attempting to promote the view that they're both teaching the same thing in different language.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's called the perennial philosophy, and I think that's dead wrong, you know. And it always ends up taking one of the religions, whether I've seen it's done from both the Buddhist side and from the Christian side. They'll take the other religion and twist the meaning of it to make it agree with their religion. And I think that's dead wrong. And I've had discussions about this with Christian monks and priests that I respect from these interfaith dialogues I've been involved in. And they agree as well. And what we come to an understanding that toleration of each other's religion doesn't mean accepting the other person's views. You know, that you know, I respect those monks as sincere practitioners and sincere seekers. You know, even though from my point of view, I think they have wrong view. It's not. I think the world is better off having people like that in it than not. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's possible to get very advanced with still having wrong views, so long as you just sort of detach from it. You know, it's like some Hindus, I mean, they've got very advanced, you know, like Ramana Maharshi in the 20th century. He literally worshipped a hill, but still, I mean, he'd write devotional verses to this Arunachala hill, you know, and he believed in he was a Shaivite Hindu apparently, but he was really just apophatic. I mean, he would talk in accordance with his culture, which I mean, everybody has to do that. The Buddha had to do that. Everybody has to frame what they're explaining in terms of their culture. But still, there's the actual experience can just be completely beyond any kind of words anyway. And
Yeah.
one thing I would say with comparison to Jesus and the Buddhas, I think the Buddha was much more successful as a teacher, since it seems like Jesus's disciples really just didn't get it. You know, they
Yeah.
just essentially just declared in the Messiah and you know, just turned it into like a personality cult.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Just-
the biggest influence on later Christianity was Paul, who actually never met Jesus.
Yeah, and he actually spent like 3 years in Arabia working out his system of Christianity before he went to Jerusalem and actually met any of Jesus's disciples.
Yeah.
So he sort of turned Christianity into a world religion, while at the same time just kind of wrecking it, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I just
But
want to comment.
he had this really subtle idea of faith where it's like, if you have sufficient faith, then you're like dead to the world. So it wasn't, it's like, if you had sufficient faith, then you would just spontaneously act in a saintly manner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was very prone to misunderstanding and misuse, so that later on people just say, so long as you just believe in Jesus, you know, you're saved, and
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. I was going to comment on what Ajahn Punnadhammo said earlier about trying to mix Buddhism and Christianity. In 1997, when I started teaching in Vancouver, Thich Nhat Hanh came out with a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ, Jesus and Buddha as Brothers. And I had a friend, Arya Bodhi from the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. I told him about this book. He said, no, he's lost all sense of boundary, you know. It's like, what a way to sell books in the market, right? You say, oh, that's all the same thing. They're brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember Joseph Campbell, you know, the great American mythologist, you know, he once said, you know, Jesus had 12 disciples, Buddha had 12 disciples. You can match these traditions right down the line. And after his death on this show, someone else, they had to insert this commentator. So no, this is not true. They're so utterly different. The icons are so utterly different. They had to correct what Joseph Campbell was trying to say. Oh, it's all the same thing. It's all beautiful. It's all wonderful. Yeah, like you're saying, I think that does a disservice. I mean, it's toleration means respecting the difference, not trying to make them the same.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
One of the interesting parallels that I think has some validity is between Vajrayana Buddhism and Christianity, with the Vajrayana concept of the Trikaya, you know, the three bodies of the Buddha, Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dharmakaya, that map pretty closely to the Trinity in Christianity.
I've always sort of viewed it as Jesus, the human being, Jesus in glory sitting in heaven, and the Father, God the Father. But yeah, the Holy Spirit, I think that was sort of a Jewish idea. It was started off as Sophia, which was sort of a feminine noun, and yeah. But so according to that, the Nirmanakaya would be the Holy Spirit.
No, Nirmanakaya would be Jesus.
Oh, the Sambhogakaya, I mean, yeah.
The Sambhogakaya would be the Holy Spirit as the intermediary between the ultimate Dharmakaya, the Father, and the manifest form and in the flesh on the earth, Jesus as a Nirmanakaya, and then the kind of archetypal level in between, the intermediary, is the Holy Spirit.
I'd also say the Vajrayana has a lot of devotion to the guru. Like, you just really believe in the guru. The guru is more important than the Buddha, because the Buddha's not here. The guru is here. A lot of personality cult around the guru.
Yes. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Oh, one interesting contrast between Christianity and Buddhism is that the Christian devil is in the lowest pits of hell, whereas the Buddhist devil is in the highest heaven realm of the sensuous world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mara Straightner, it's a very interesting comparison between the two.
He's sort of like the god of samsara in a way. You know, if he can't get you to be bad, he'll get you to be good, because either way you're still stuck in samsara.
Yeah. Another parallel that I've come across and I commented on is the three temptations of Christ in the desert. They map pretty closely to the three forms of tanha. The devil first tempts Jesus when Jesus was fasting for 40 days, and he first tempted him to eat bread, you know, sense desire. Then he tempted to make him king of the world, you know, bhava tanha. Then he said, well, okay, you don't want to do that, then throw yourself off the cliff, you know, vibhava tanha.
Yeah, that's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
You think they borrowed that from Buddhism, like Mara's temptation of the Buddha?
I don't think so. I don't think it was. My suspicion is not a direct borrowing, but that whether that story ever actually happened or not, the people who concocted it were basing it on real fundamental aspects of the human psyche.
Yeah.
That there were actual expressions of, you know, our basic drives, and they were subtle enough to pick up on that.
I think one thing they did borrow was Saint Jehoshaphat was a very important Catholic saint, and I think they had a holiday. Then someone they discovered, oh, this is the Buddhist Bhagawat. We got to stop this. So they stopped observing the holiday. They couldn't unsaint him, right? I guess he's still Jehoshaphat is still a saint, but they just kind of don't pay so much attention now.
There's a story that, well, the Buddhist version is certainly older, so the Christians must have borrowed it, because the parallels are far too close. That when Siddhartha Gautama was born, they had the Brahmins come in to examine him for the marks, and they predicted what was going to happen. And one of the Brahmins said, "This is glorious, he will become a Buddha, but I'm in despair because I won't live long enough to see that." And the exact same story happens to Jesus. He's examined as a baby by these wise men, and one of them first laughs and then cries. And they ask him, "What are you laughing and crying about?" He says, this is the Messiah, but I'll be dead before he comes into his mission."
Ah, they stole it from us.
Yeah, it must be.
Must be.
The details are too close.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in those days, there was a lot of trade between the West and India. So, I mean, that's how the whole idea of St. Josaphat got into Europe, was over the trade routes, where Josaphat is just a corruption of Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
Was it Bodhisattva, not Bhagavat?
Well, it was Bodhisattva, which then became like Bodhisaf I think it was Arabic or something, and then it became like Lodisaf in like Armenian, and then it became Yoasaf when it got to Greece, and then it became Josephatus in Latin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it's not the Buddha who is a Catholic saint. It's just a previous existence that is the Catholic saint. Otherwise, it'd be interesting that the Buddha himself would be a Catholic saint.
How do we summarize the two religions? I say, well, Buddhism, as far as I know, we've never had a religious war, whereas Christianity's had a lot of wars. Also, the cultivation of wisdom. If you look at like within Christianity, some Christian leaders may become wise in spite of the religion. They might just be wise people or do a lot of study. Maybe that's not a fair thing. Christians might not think that's a fair thing to say, but I think within Buddhism, you see the cultivation of wisdom, and monks have been at it for decades because it's about the cultivation of wisdom. Whereas like with Christian ministers, evangelists, it's not so much that necessary to cultivate wisdom. There seems to be a
they're
difference.
more into cultivating virtue, or at least the medieval saints were, and the early, desert fathers and so forth.
Yeah.
It was, you just cultivate virtue, and the genius of virtue is the saint, whereas Buddhism is more directed towards wisdom and sagehood.
And I think any element of that was in Christianity was completely thrown out the window with Protestantism. The Protestant Reformation I see as a disaster for the spiritual life of Europe. It was just.
Well, how is that? How would you explain that?
Well, with Catholicism and Orthodox branches of Christianity, you have a monastic practice, and you have people devoted to seeking the higher life, and that's seen as a valid path, and even the highest possible path for a Christian to take. But that was totally rejected by the Protestants, and the Protestants also retreated into a very literal interpretation of everything. And are you familiar with the book The Master and the Emissary by Ian McGilchrist?
No.
That was Ajahn Sona that turned me onto that book. It's a very, very interesting book. It deals with left brain, right brain stuff, right? And the second half of the book, he applies that to history, how different phases of history, there were different relationships between the two halves of the brain. And he sees the Protestant Reformation as one of the most radical swings in favor of left brain thinking. And because of that extreme literalism and also the iconoclasm, the right brain appreciates images and metaphors to understand things on a more subtle level. The left brain wants everything literal and just whatever, every jot and tittle in the Bible has to be exactly corrected. None of it could be interpreted metaphorically or as an allegory, or it's not open to interpretation because the left brain is incapable of doing that.
Yeah, I think one of the first things the Protestants did was to abolish monasticism, which
Yes.
abolished, contemplation essentially, other
Yes.
than maybe amateur, prayer and so forth. So there is that, yeah. And also, there was this other thing. Now I can't remember what it was, so I guess never mind. But yeah, there's definitely some radical changes. And it's just the worldliness of Protestantism, where you're going to reach salvation while making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the Bible it goes contrary to the Bible in certain respects. Like greed is a form of idolatry, and all this weep and wail, oh you rich man, for the sorrows that shall befall you, and sell all that you have, give the money to the poor, and take up the cross, and all this kind of a thing. It just kind of that was maybe adopted metaphorically by the Protestants, in that really they were, it was sort of I mean, I have read, I think it was Richard Gombrich was pointing out that Buddhism was sort of like a Protestant movement, where the culture was changing in India, and you were starting to have, money had recently been invented, and you're starting to have like a merchant class, and the satis, like Anatta Pandika, and they weren't living the agrarian life anymore that the old religions were adapted towards. And so they were interested in this new system that was more intellectual, I guess. But I think that's might be stretching the comparison a little bit, but it was like the emerging middle class, like the mercantile class, that really were the first Protestants.
Yeah.
Well, some of the kings that just didn't like the Pope being as powerful as they were.
Yeah, there is some parallels, but I don't like to compare Buddhism to Protestantism too much.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of the appeal for the 19th century English that got interested in Buddhism. Like I.B. Horner and Rice Davies. They interpreted that lens. They saw Buddhism as being Protestant and rational, and rejecting the flourishes of Hinduism. That was kind of the appeal to those, because they were deeply Protestant in their background, the English way of thinking.
Yeah, just the English language is adapted for Protestantism. We think more or less like Protestants just because we're thinking in English.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I could see
like
that.
the Worfian hypothesis or something.
Yeah. Of all the branches of Christianity, do you have a feeling which would you say is most resonant with Buddhism?
Well, it'd have to be one of the monastic sects, like Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism. I mean, it would have to be one of the older ones that still have monks and nuns.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would probably lean towards Orthodoxy over Catholicism. But yeah, I find that Protestantism is the furthest away from the Buddhist way of thinking, actually.
Yeah, and I suppose sort of something like Catholicism with all the pagan elements that got absorbed, it would be sort of like the Brahmanistic elements that got absorbed into Buddhism. Although again, we're pushing comparisons.
Yeah. But there's something to it.
I think in Protestantism is kind of a conspiracy to attack the Christian religion. You get you divided two sides, get in fighting Protestants against Catholics, but really the cutting down of monasticism, you can see that as conspiracy to undermine the spirituality of the Christian religion, the higher spiritual aspect, get rid of the monks. Think of that as
I think somebody like Henry VIII was just a worldly minded person who couldn't really see any advantage in a contemplative renunciant life, and he just wanted all the wealth of the monasteries. I don't think there was necessarily any deeper conspiracy than him just wanting more power and more money.
Well, I agree with that, but I think with Martin Luther, he wasn't killed. They probably could have killed him, but they didn't. My theory, and I've read from others, is he was protected, and that the Pope may have gone along with this, that it was a deliberate conspiracy to allow this to happen. That's what some people say.
And I find that far-fetched. I don't think the Pope, I don't think the Pope went along with it. I think that the Pope, my reading of that history is that the Pope didn't appreciate how serious the thing was. Thought, oh, this is just one crazy crank, and didn't want,
Oh,
you know,
it grew.
And Martin Luther was protected by one of the German princes.
Yeah.
I forget, it was the Frederick of Saxony, I think, who was an early convert. He was quite powerful, and he protected Luther from.
Yeah. So he was protected, and it grew and it grew, and he wasn't killed. So I think there's forces behind that wanted to split up the Christian religion and diminish the monasticism.
There was also the fact that he had the printing press at his disposal, the new technology.
Oh yeah. It's about 1500 around that time.
Yeah, there's an academic article about that I read not too long ago about the early rising of Mahayana in India, and the author's thesis was that it was only possible because the technology of writing had become widespread. Like writing existed already at the Buddhist time, but it was not used for writing down religious texts. That was considered kind of profane to do that. It was used entirely for correspondence between merchants and between kings and so on. It was just used for very prosaic purposes.
Oh, so did the Mahayana have writing and write there and spread it around and spread the Mahayana that way?
When you come up with the author's argument was that you come up with a you make up a new sutra, you come up with a totally new doctrine, right?
Like the Black Lives Matter Sutra.
Yeah, and and the monks were previously passing on the sutra by oral chanting, and if this new guy shows up and says, "Oh well, I got the Prajnaparamita Sutra, this is spoken by the Buddha, but it's not known till now," okay, never mind. He would need to convince enough people to get a chanting group going.
I guess he's got to go to the outskirts of India too, go on the outskirts where people don't know any better.
When you can write it in a manuscript,
yeah,
like one person can make several copies and pass it around, and it can be spread that way. And you're able to introduce heterodox elements more easily once you have writing as a vehicle for transmission.
Yeah.
Printing multiplied that again.
Yeah.
And the internet's multiplying that again to another order of magnitude. So we're seeing all kinds of heterodoxy.
I have a chapter in my book actually called Changing Buddha's Words. It's sarcasm about the Mahayana, how to write your own Mahayana Sutra.
Yeah.
I hope I don't get bad karma for that.
Now in the West, they're just trying to change Theravada, which the subject we can get to later maybe, but
yeah, we're still on Jesus. Yeah, we've been spending a lot of time on Jesus here over 45 minutes. So I guess I'm done all my points about Jesus. Anything else you like to say on Jesus and Christianity?
I'll recommend one book that I found very interesting and challenging. I was actually asked by one of my Catholic monk friends to write a review of it for their interfaith journal. And it took me 2 readings to get the author's argument properly. It's by a theologian named Panikar, and he has a background. He was born in India, raised as a Hindu, then converted to Catholicism, and he's got one of these encyclopedic minds, and he's read all the Buddhist texts, all the Hindu texts, all the Christian texts. And this book was the title of the book is The Buddha, and he was talking about Buddhism. And it impressed me that he has such a subtle understanding of the Dharma. He wasn't making a caricature of it. And he was trying to answer the question, well, why did the Buddha never teach about God? And he rejected, for various reasons, he rejected that the Buddha was an atheist. He rejected that he was an agnostic. He even rejected that the Buddha's view of God was apophatic. And he ended up, his conclusion of his argument was that the Buddha thought that even asking that question is meaningless. Is there a God or not? It's a meaningless question. So it's like a very subtle level of thinking, this guy. This is what Christian theology taken to a very subtle level.
But I don't think it's meaningless. I think it's an important question for many people, whether God decides or not.
Well, you'd have to read the book to, get his, I mean, he sort of builds up to that, for us to, if I'm going to kind of give a very simplistic version of his argument, is to say, like, us as human beings, we're like insects arguing about the existence or not of cities, like it's so far beyond our comprehension. All we can, if we're going to ask whether God exists or not, first we have to decide, what do you mean by existence and non-existence? And these are things that are really beyond our comprehension.
Okay. So what's the name of the book?
It's just the Buddha.
Oh yeah, the Buddha. Wow.
By Panikar, P-A-N-I-K-A-A-R.
Well, if I were to recommend a Christian book, I would recommend The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. He would have made an excellent Buddhist.
Yeah, I have not read that. I have read, what's his name? German mystics.
Meister Eckhart.
Meister Eckhart. I have read Meister Eckhart.
Yeah, he's another one who would have made a good Buddhist.
Yeah. The cloud of unknowing.
I think he said
Yeah.
the eye of God and the eye that sees me is the same eye, something like that. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Ajahn Punnadhammo, pannobhasa. Appreciate the talk. And also for the audience, there's links below to Ajahn Punnadhammo and pannobhasa. You can find them. Okay, thanks.